Hi, I'm Bridget Price,
And I'm Lauren Kemp.
and this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. Many of us feel as though what we do to earn a living defines us as individuals. As such, we hold so much pride in the work that we do that it becomes a large part of our identity. In some instances, our profession completely defines us, and we lose sight of who we are at the core. Entrepreneurs often battle proving ourselves, defending our choices, and getting others to understand our plights. Entrepreneurs are generalized, but we are all very different. In this episode, we discuss the purpose of identity and redefining what it means to be an entrepreneur. So let's get started. Lauren, you and I had this conversation in season 1 of our podcast and really focusing on whether or not we were comfortable referring to ourselves as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
When we decided to take on that title and really working hard to feel as though we can fit the mold of what we defined as an entrepreneur. So tell me a bit about how you define yourself as an entrepreneur and what that title means for you.
Sure. I think for me, being an entrepreneur is someone who starts their own business, whether it's a side hustle or like a full-blown enterprise, someone who's trying to create something out of nothing, and usually in order to make money. And I was talking with Brian about it a bit, actually, and the label it's heavy because I don't, like, neither of us really wanted to call ourselves entrepreneurs until we had a somewhat successful business. I think that's just how we would prefer to like accept that title, because you can start so many businesses. And I was talking to him too about like, well, you're kind of a serial entrepreneur, and he's like, I don't really like that, and it's because that has its own connotations. I think it's just a tough label because so much gets wrapped up in it for good and bad.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we were hesitant to call ourselves entrepreneurs because for many years, I felt as though an entrepreneur meant you already had a successful business. And or before I became an entrepreneur, a full-blown entrepreneur, I used to unfortunately hold some judgment or reserve some judgment for those who called themselves entrepreneurs. I often came across what we define now as entrepreneurs, people who are striving to be entrepreneurs or desire, but haven't exactly made the steps to do that. They might have side hustles or something of the sort, but they're not a full-blown, I guess, what you would call an entrepreneur. And so I was resistant to that title because I felt like I did not have the success that came along with having such a heavy title. And I did prejudge entrepreneurs before I actually became one. When I was younger, I looked at entrepreneurs sometimes as people who weren't really focused. Some of them, in my experiences, have given off this vibe of trying to get rich quick.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have a lot of entrepreneurial examples in my life that I could build a new frame around. And so I regret that I was judgmental because I think those are such a small segment of who entrepreneurs actually represent. And so, I didn't want people judging me like how I judged them. Like, entrepreneur felt so vague because sometimes, I'm not sure if you ever encountered this, but when you ask someone what they did for a living and they said, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, my question or follow-up question in my mind was, what do you operate, or what business do you run, or why didn't you lead with that? And why are you leading with, I'm an entrepreneur?
When asked that question, I've never responded, I'm an entrepreneur. I've said that my husband and I run a small software consulting business.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah. So I always thought it was strange. And I also do think there was a time where when you did say you're an entrepreneur, it was very loaded. And so you probably leaned into that or led with that to be taken more seriously, I think. Or quite honestly, this was a person or persons who were in between their next business venture. And it was just easier to say, I'm an entrepreneur. But yeah, I think the title does carry so much weight because people have defined it differently for so many years.
Yeah, and I think we talked about too how sometimes it can trigger insecurities in others. So if you have someone saying, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, I go out and I make my own money. I'm my own boss. I don't have to adhere to anyone. I'm doing my own thing. that can sometimes bring up stuff for others who don't believe they can do that. I feel like it just brings up stuff. And I feel like that judgment's never going to go away, because I think that even, as you mentioned, like people are judgy of entrepreneurs, but I think entrepreneurs are also judgy of other entrepreneurs.
Yes.
I think because it means so many different things to different people. And it's a different lifestyle that not everybody understands. And I think probably too, because it's so tied into your identity and whether or not you're successful or a failure or a trailblazer or a entrepreneur. Yeah. There's all these names for different types of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And I think we've done such a poor job at, even for entrepreneurs, defining themselves or what they do exactly, because we didn't want to be judged, or we didn't want to be the victims of people raising doubts over our professions, over our careers, over our choices. And I've spoken about this before too. Even when I felt like I was more into my entrepreneurial phase versus my actual full-time job, part of having that full-time job was a buffer between telling people I was actually an entrepreneur, that was my passion, and I could shield myself or protect myself and my feelings in case people didn't respond well to me being an entrepreneur or owning a cleaning business, because it seemed like so out of the realm of what I've done for the last 10, 12 years that it just didn't make sense. And so I fell back into the comforts of what my full-time job was at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think anytime anybody tries something new, there's that identity shift. So if people haven't seen you do something before, then they're gonna be like, oh, that's odd, you do that. I mean, when I took a baking class, like I am known in my family for like, I was a picky eater when I was a kid. I was terrible at making my own food. Like we would joke about how I'm so glad I married Brian because he enjoys cooking and I would be living off crackers and cereal otherwise. But then when you do something different, then it's, oh, what are you doing here? You're changing? What's going on? And I think that with entrepreneurship, it's an even bigger change, because I think, again, because it brings up that, whole autonomy thing, success, there's money involved, there's a lot of more judgment that comes when it comes to like our careers and our money and goals and ambitions.
Yeah. And for me as a young kid, entrepreneur was not in my vocabulary. It's even hard for me to recall like business owner being in my vocabulary in that way. It was always about these hard, skilled, defined professions: doctor, lawyer, teacher, journalist, newscaster, like these very tangible, kind of obvious job career fields, but not entrepreneur. And I didn't really get introduced into this lifestyle until I was almost 20. I believe my definition of being an entrepreneur has changed. And I know that for a lot of people who's always been mavericks in that sense, who have always kind of blazed their own trail, like we mentioned, we believe Brian and Marcus was always like that. And they always wanted to do what was best for them. And now I define an entrepreneur as someone who wants to work for themselves, who does work for themselves, create opportunities for others, and takes control over their career and their passions and what they want to do as a profession to earn money. So my definition has definitely changed over the years.
Yeah, I agree. Like growing up, I think we touched on this again before, that you don't see little kids saying, I'm going to grow up to be a small business owner, or I'm going to grow up to be a startup founder, entrepreneur. Maybe a little bit more now because it's a little bit more ubiquitous or glamorized in the media.
What are your feelings around people who choose to define, or at least choose to tell others what they do for a living and define themselves as an entrepreneur versus leading with what business they own or operate or what industry they're in? Why do you think they have that in like their job title or business card or anything of the sort?
Like entrepreneur on their business card? Yeah, I guess I've never come across anybody like that.
I've seen some business cards that have like small business owner, entrepreneur.
Okay.
That's their title on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I've heard people say like, "Oh, I own a tech company," because they have
Tech startup
a
founder.
little bit of equity in something that hasn't even like fully realized. How do I feel about those people who identify or are open about it?
Even though our podcast is about being entrepreneurs in progress, I don't think you or I lead with, "Hi, I'm Lauren and I'm an entrepreneur," or "I'm Bridget and we say we operate or run a small business." So I am trying to glean and maybe we should ask other entrepreneurs who actually do lead with that title, why they're so comfortable doing so. And I guess really what they're trying to get across or what they want others to know about what they do or the work that they do.
Yeah, I think I would try to reserve judgment and ask more. It's, "Oh, you're an entrepreneur. Okay, tell me about businesses that you've created or what are you working on?" And I think that's really telling, because someone could say that they're an entrepreneur because they have a, successful track record of starting businesses and that's what they love doing. I feel like usually people would, I don't know, because I don't know anyone who has introduced themselves as such, but there are definitely people who try and say that, "Oh yeah, I own a tech company," when they have, a tiny bit of equity.
Yeah.
And those just remind me of hustle and grind culture and trying to come off larger than life, larger than what you actually are. And I'm not a huge fan, obviously, as we've talked this before, of trying to pretend, like trying to put up a facade or put up some kind of image of something that's not rooted in reality.
I just had an epiphany as we were working through this question or that weird question I asked, but I feel like sometimes people call themselves entrepreneurs in the similar fashion that people refer to themselves as students or professional students. That they're constantly learning or trying to get to a certain point eventually, whether it's a master's degree or doctorate degree. I think entrepreneurs could easily be defined as someone who's always striving towards a specific success metric that they've defined for themselves. They want to have a company operating in the black, or they want to take a company to IPO, or they want to build a family business that they can pass on to their kids, or whatever measure of success that they're aiming for. I think entrepreneurs can be defined as people who are constantly striving or working on businesses for themselves, much similar to how a student is constantly working on their education or advancing their education to get to a certain place or point.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight.
That's why I like having these conversations, because they take us on this journey or trying to really dig a bit more into what it's like to be an entrepreneur and how we can relate.
Yeah.
Yeah. With that said, I think that obviously we have our understanding of being an entrepreneur because we are in this fight. When do you feel as though one can truly identify, as they are starting on this path, that they're an entrepreneur? Do you think it's too early to call yourself an entrepreneur when it's your first business and you've just put up your website, or you've just maybe ordered your first test product? At what point do you think that entrepreneurs can really truly identify with being an entrepreneur?
I think that it's subjective. I think it's up to the person, really. Just because I wouldn't feel comfortable calling myself an entrepreneur until I reach whatever stage doesn't mean that someone else isn't, doesn't mean that we're not entrepreneurs as well, because I feel like it's such a subjective label. Because I think about like Brian, who has a lot of ideas, would work on stuff, but not necessarily launch a website or even come up with a minimum viable product. But he would get to various different stages in whatever he was working on or doing, and he's still entrepreneurial. I think so many people are entrepreneurial and have an entrepreneurial spirit, but whether or not they actually follow that and try and do something with it, like I think when you try and follow that spirit and try to do something entrepreneurial, you can call yourself an entrepreneur. Like Brian and I are saying, well, you could be a failed entrepreneur, which is what people kind of view serial entrepreneurs as, people who just keep trying but failing. And I don't know. I feel like entrepreneur is such a weird label because I don't feel like people introduce themselves as like entrepreneurs. I feel like it's a self-label that you bestow upon yourself when you feel like you are worthy.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny to me that we can define everything else or label everything else, and it's more concrete. If you're a nurse, you're a nurse. Like, no one can take that away from you. If you're a teacher, you're a teacher. But yes, with entrepreneur, it does seem to be this weird subjectivity to it. And when one person is comfortable enough to refer to themselves as an entrepreneur, I consider myself an entrepreneur, but I still don't lead with that, if that makes sense. Even though we have this podcast called Entrepreneurs in Progress.
Yeah.
But I think it's also out of what I feel is like a common respect that we have for who we view as like these kick-ass or badass entrepreneurs who have changed or disrupted so many industries or super innovative. And quite honestly, sometimes for me personally, who I feel have put in the work for years, I don't feel like I'm the same level of entrepreneur that Marcus is. And at the same time, we're still entrepreneurs, but just in different phases, I feel.
Do you feel like you have to be successful in order to have the label entrepreneur, or at least some level of success?
Yeah, somewhat. I do. And so I feel like it's hard for me to take on that identity as an entrepreneur. For me, my personality type has never been one to, I don't know, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, because I think we've all faked it until we made it in some regards to not just entrepreneurship, but any time in our professional careers. But I don't take on that, I don't know, that attitude of, oh, I'm getting it in, I'm, doing X, Y, Z, until I actually get it in, if that makes sense, and then have results to show for it. If chronicling the journey this is the first time I've really done that, and I've only feel comfortable doing that because I feel like we've made it to a certain level, and we can talk about our unique experiences that have gotten us to this point. And then ideally, we look at this a year from now, or if we're still hosting this podcast, we will still have more musings and experiences to share with people as we continue to progress in our business. So I feel like it was hard at first to consider myself an entrepreneur. Now I do, but I'm still cautious about how I approach people and telling them that I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where there's always going to be judgment because of lack of understanding. There's judgment among entrepreneurs based on where you are in the stage. Further along entrepreneurs will have judgment on newbie entrepreneurs. And I think it's just one of those things where you just have to ignore it. It's so subjective. Yeah. It's whatever, whenever you feel you want to label it. And if you share that outwardly, I would just expect the judgment.
Yeah.
I would just expect it from anyone.
That's very fair. And I think another thing, Lauren, with entrepreneurship, why it's so cloudy or blurred, is that there are 1,000,001 businesses and they're not one and the same. And where someone is on their journey is completely different than where someone else might be or will end up one day. And so I think that, unfortunately, there is some type of judgment with regard to entrepreneurs amongst each other, because everyone has their own idea of what success looks like and
how to get there.
Exactly. And how to get there. It looks different for every industry. And in our last episode, I forgot to mention when we were talking about remote companies, obviously there are some industries where you can't work remote, right? If you are a hairstylist, if you are a doctor with your own practice, you're still a business owner, but you have to have office space. So again, there's so many different ways to be an entrepreneur that I think that there's this breeding room for people placing their insights on whether or not you fit the mold.
I think the interesting thing too about identity and entrepreneurship is that we wrap our identity in our businesses, and it's like an extension of ourselves. We've talked about how being an entrepreneur feels very vulnerable because it feels like that extension of yourself out in the world to be judged and stuff. And I know that identity can be wrapped up in people's careers where they feel really defined by their job, but I don't feel it's quite the same as like your business being an extension of yourself. And that's one of the things I think entrepreneurs struggle with, is separating that who you are is separate from your business. Yeah. Or do you think that is even true? Is it true that we are separate?
I think we are separate. Like, I think you and I have, I don't know, put in the work, or we recognize the importance of separating who we are from what we do. However, I know what it's like to wrap yourself in the identity of what you do for a living or your profession or your work. Again, I still think by doing that, it's an armor, right? You're putting on some shield because you want to be validated. You want people to buy into what you're selling. You want to feel empowered. And so with regard to entrepreneurs, I think they do that a lot because you are in such a vulnerable place. In order to stop whatever you're doing and go against the norm and work on your own business, work for yourself, when everyone else is doing the opposite, you have to sell it. You have to believe it. You have to emulate it. And I think people take on this identity of what they believe an entrepreneur is so they can keep going in order to sustain themselves.
I think it evolves. So I think in the beginning that it does feel like an extension of yourself because it's your brainchild, it's your idea, it's your business that you're trying to build. You are putting in all the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears, the risk, all of that. So I think in the beginning, it really feels like an extension of yourself. But as we have grown, the goal is for it to run without you. For some people, they want to sell it. For some people, they want to keep working in it. For me and Brian, we eventually want the business to run separate from us. And I think that's how it can feel separate. It's okay, like, here's us, here's the business. We want this thing to be able to run on its own without us eventually.
Same here. Marcus and I want to have it run autonomously. We want it to be passive income. We want it to be a revenue stream. We don't want to work in our business. We want to take time to work on other things. And I agree with that evolution. I do think that for a large segment of entrepreneurs, a lot of their businesses are tied to passions. They are tied to a specific skill or talent they want to share with the world. And so they definitely feel as though their business is a representation of who they are, and it is a part of their identity and extension of themselves. And for some people, they hold on to that identity, right? Their business is who they are. For me, I choose not to operate that way because I never want anything that I do, again, professionally to define me, because I think we're so much more than that. And I think that can also, we're already in a place where we are dealing with self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and things like that, where putting your eggs all in one basket with regard to how you define yourself, if anything happens that is out of your control and you no longer have said business, man, that can really destroy you internally. And that's what I want to avoid. And there's always going to be a part of you, regardless of any business that you're in. If you built it up, if you put blood, sweat, and tears into it, if you worked your ass off and it's no longer, whether that's by your choice or not by your choice, you're going to feel something. You're going to feel a certain amount of loss. It may not be significant for others. It may not look the same, but when you put a lot of your time into something like a business, it's hard not to have it represent some part of you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because you're also the one setting the culture, how it operates. It's based off of your beliefs and how you want to run this business. So I think, I think you're right. There's always going to be part of you that feels connected to it. Maybe some people can really separate it out, because sometimes I think about the people who are really good at starting businesses and then selling them. And then you start something new, you put the team in together and you've got the playbook and you're like, I'm out. So I feel like for those kind of entrepreneurs, it's not as personal. Their identity is not wrapped up so much in any particular business, but their ability to build and then build again.
I've been working on trying to really think about my place in our business and just what business serves in my life as well. And obviously at this point, it's definitely somewhat of a means to an end. Like, it's paying our bills, taking care of our cost of living. But I'm thinking about the bigger picture and how I want it to add to my life versus me giving to it too. It needs to bring some benefit to me. And I think that if I'm able to get some type of mutual benefit from being an entrepreneur versus just putting all my blood, sweat, and tears into it, I want it to be something that I'm proud of, that
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind sharing. And then that if someone did see my business or how we operated or how we functioned, they would say, oh yeah, that definitely does feel like Bridget and Marcus, or that is, I could see why you're running this way, or that definitely has your fingerprints all over it type of thing. Because we do leave a mark with our businesses. And even though we don't want it to be our sole identity, it's going to have our DNA all over it. And I think that's where entrepreneurs really struggle with keeping intact, not having it suck them in completely, not having it just be the one and only thing that they're known for.
So I think what we're saying is there is always going to be a connection with your business, but to also separate yourself as much as possible or have a healthy balance. Is that?
It's about striking a healthy balance, because ultimately, just with like anyone else, I think entrepreneurs can get really caught up in the hype. They can get caught up in trying to embody a character for people, especially if they're good at it. If you are a dope entrepreneur, you have several businesses that are thriving, you're hosting or teaching master classes or whatever on how to start your businesses, and people look to you for mentorship, you really start talking this language. You know what I mean? Like you're always talking in this business sense. You're always looking at opportunities to make money. I'm not sure if that's happened to you, Lauren, but there will be periods in our household where like literally everything we see on TV or look, outside, like is a business opportunity. Oh, you can make money like this. And sometimes it feels like it's taking over, and we can't even enjoy like a stroll without another business concept or idea or venture swimming in our head that we have to share with each other. And so it was really sad. But most recently, we saw what happened with Simone Biles and her exit at the Tokyo Olympics. And one of the things she mentioned was all of the love and support that she received showed her that she's so much more than just a gymnast. And she hadn't believed that before. And again, when you are really great at something and you've done it your whole life or a really long time of a period of your life, sometimes you don't know anything else. And then that quickly becomes your identity. And when you are trying to do something different, when you are trying to find more range, people find it odd. And they're like, what are you doing? You're this. Why are you moving in this territory? And I just think that I get why people want to tie their identity to a job or profession. I just think that for me, it's just not the best thing to do. It's not really healthy.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about balance. I don't know though, because there's some people that just love what they do,
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, oh, like there's fitness people, but that's what they love doing. They love working out and being healthy and inspiring others to be healthy. And like, that's
does it get to a point where it's too much or overwhelming, or it's limited that person because they've only focused on what they loved, that they can't even determine if they'll love anything else?
I don't know. I think that's an individual thing that they need to figure out. I think it's a problem when you wrap all of your self-worth in one thing, whether that be a relationship or your job or a business or your identity being a gymnast. Like, I think it's, if you wrap your self-worth in that one part, one identity thing, I think that's where it could be some trouble. But I don't know. I think it just depends on the person. Like, you and I would prefer to have a well-balanced life, and we care about not only our business, but our relationships. And that's how we would like to live, to be happy and fulfilled. But not everybody feels that way.
Yeah. I know Brian touched on, when you asked him the conversation about identity as an entrepreneur, maybe even defining him as a serial entrepreneur, he was turned off to that title. I think I have a feeling why, but did he express why he wasn't a fan of being a serial entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think partly because he feels like it's usually associated with a unsuccessful entrepreneur, someone who starts a lot of different ideas and never follows through. Brian doesn't like that label because I think he associates it with failure, which isn't always true, because there are plenty of serial entrepreneurs who are very successful at building a business, as we've talked before, selling it or putting the team in place and then starting over because that's the part of entrepreneurship they love to do.
Yeah. I don't look at serial entrepreneur as a negative thing. I could see why Brian would think that. I used to think the same because it did seem like this person, almost like a job hopper, like you're going from
like
one
lack
to the
of
next.
follow through.
Yeah, lack of consistency. You can't stay still or stay in one thing for too long. And I could see that raising a few red flags. But I do think that people get bored or they're inspired by growing a company or scaling a company. And then once the company is basically at a plateau and they're steady, they want to go on to the next thing and do the same thing over and over. And they get the high from driving revenue or growing businesses at crazy rates and then making a ton of money off of them. But the more I learn about other entrepreneurs and their growth, I don't look at being a serial entrepreneur as a bad thing. I expect that Marcus and I will be serial entrepreneurs. Technically, Marcus already is, but that's what I expect us to do over the next 20, 30 years, is to be some type of serial entrepreneur and have our hats in a lot of different things.
I think that's just also dependent on the type of person you are, because there are some people I think we've talked about who love doing this one thing, or they're all about this one business. They have their one idea. They just love it. And then there are people who are like, oh, I'm interested in a lot of different things, and I can't imagine doing one thing for, the rest of my life. So I think that's where the serial entrepreneurs come from. And I think Brian and I are the same as you and Marcus, and we're interested in a lot of different things. Like, I can't imagine doing just one thing for the rest of our lives. Like, I can't imagine Rotive being the one thing we do for the entirety of our career.
It's so funny. I was just thinking about how hearing people call us entrepreneurs or even referring to ourselves as entrepreneurs isn't super likely or common. I don't think any of my friends have referred to me as an entrepreneur, but like they'll make jokes and say, oh, Bridge has her 1 million businesses, or she's operating 12 businesses over here, and then she's doing this. And so there's some understanding of me typically working with Marcus on a business idea or a side hustle or venture that people recognize, but I don't think would classify me as an entrepreneur either. Maybe they do. They just prefer not to use that language.
Or maybe too, because when people use entrepreneur as a title, it's associated with some level of success. Successful. Not to say obviously that I obviously think Made Easy is super successful.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
I'm not trying to downplay that at all. But
yeah, it's a certain level of success in their mind. I need to be like Oprah or something.
Few successful businesses under your belt, or who knows?
Yeah.
Because it's so subjective. I also feel like people are more likely to say, oh, they're a small business owner, or they run a business, versus using, oh, they're an entrepreneur. I think if like my parents were asked, oh, what does your daughter do? Oh, she and her husband run a business together, I think is what would be said. I've never heard someone say, oh, this person's an entrepreneur. And I've never also heard someone introduce themselves as an entrepreneur. So,
yeah. So what do you think about the title of our podcast? The fact that we're entrepreneurs in progress, if we're trying to steer clear of this kind of identity or label.
Well, I think small business owner is in progress is not a succinct enough title. I mean, entrepreneur is in progress is already a long ass title with some like room for spelling mistakes.
Oh man.
I know for those of you listening, that was what we came up with because we do feel like it encapsulated what we are and who we're also trying to speak to and relate to. Is we wouldn't say we're small business owners in progress because that's something that you are, but I guess it's funny that we chose to name this with a label that we don't even define well.
I mean, a label that we feel holds a lot of weight, but you're right. I think we felt like it encapsulated what we are doing. And technically we are entrepreneurs, and it doesn't make up everything that we are, but I think for those who we were trying to speak to, it captured the essence of what it means to work for yourself, be your own boss, seek this autonomy and freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur. And yeah, I just think it's funny because our podcast is titled as such. But yes, you're right. Small business owners is not neatly packaged.
Yeah. I don't know what else we would describe us as, or this podcast as.
Yeah.
Because you're right.
We are literally
entrepreneurs in progress because we haven't quite made it.
Yeah. We're trying to get there. We're trying to get to that golden mountaintop thing so we can sing from the top of it and then walk all the way down and try to start all the way over again. I mean, technically, I feel like once you've had some moderate success as an entrepreneur, you don't ever fully start all the way over because you have so much knowledge and experience that you're building off of. But yeah, I've read recently, Lauren, about entrepreneurs who have sold their businesses or they've had the really, I don't want to say one hit type of wonder situation, but they had this massive success in one of their businesses. They sold it, they got the money, and they ran out of it. Essentially, they were living off of it, and it didn't get them as far as they thought it would. And there was this paralyzing fear about becoming or starting over again as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And they were questioning whether or not, was I really an entrepreneur or that I just get lucky one time, created a successful business, and now I'm tasked with doing it all over again. Can I actually do it? Am I an entrepreneur? Do I want to be an entrepreneur? And that's where that identity thing gets a little shaky, I think, for some people. It's something that I think I'm going to keep exploring over the next few years, or at least pay close attention to, because I do think that with Made Easy and some of our other business ideas that at least one that we hope to flesh out by the end of the year, that is who I'm going to be. And I struggle sometimes. I've had this conversation with you about, do I have this business identity that I put out into my social media? Do I just reserve it for LinkedIn? How do I show all aspects of me, or should I even have to worry about doing that?
Yeah.
I wrestle with that quite a bit because I think that for a lot of people, when they're figuring out who they identify with or what they identify with, they want to have aspects of their life also reflect that, and they want others to see that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a personal choice, depending on how private or public a person you are. I'm more of an open book. Brian is a lot more private.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends on,
I know, like
your
people like
personality.
actors and actresses, they really try their hardest to separate themselves from their craft, because it's easy to identify them on the street sometimes, and people just always assume that they're this character that they recognize them from, and they hate it so much, right? They're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not this made up character, this fictional character. I'm a real human.
Yeah.
This is me outside of that. And I think they can appreciate people respecting their crafts or being fans, but I think and acting might be different because it's a world of make believe. So like,
yeah, probably a different scenario, because I'm trying to think like, is it just trying to decide like how much of yourself to share with others? Is that what you're trying to figure out?
It's weird. I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but you'll have people who follow you on social media. They get a glimpse into what you do, but if, let's say, you accidentally bump into them on the streets, they really couldn't tell you what it is that you do. They probably couldn't really tell you, like, what they know your profession is. Like, they know you might dibble and dabble in this, or they've heard that you had this success, or in my case, they might have seen the post of us hitting $1 million in revenue after 3 years. So they might see glimpses, but they really don't have the full picture. And so for people who work really hard at what they do, I guess it is a personal choice or something that they have to decide on their own. But like, sometimes I grapple with like, how much do I want people to actually know of what I do? Does it matter? Is it more about my character versus how I earn my living? But then there's parts of me that are proud of what I do. And I want to share that part too. And I also want to encourage people to pursue things that might be a little outside of their comfort zone.
Sure.
And so there's not that shock that we see sometimes when people haven't seen me in years and they find out I run a cleaning company and they're like, what the hell? But yeah, things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
know.
again that's just a personal choice. I think
Mm-hmm.
that for anyone who follows like me on Instagram, they know quite a bit of what I'm up to and what I care about, and they see a lot of Brian and Indy and
Yeah.
this podcast. And actually, you know what, I don't share that much about Rotiv on Instagram, but that's mostly because Rotiv is B2B and like most of like my audience wouldn't care anyway. So
Yeah. So I think there are spaces for entrepreneurs like your business where you can reserve that piece where it doesn't necessarily need to be shared. But what about entrepreneurs who take on extensions of themselves as brands? Like, for example, my college consulting company was a moniker after my middle name, College Genie, a play on the word genie. And then you have the social media influencers or people who use themselves to expand their brand or become their brand. Really, when I think about identity as an entrepreneur, I guess I'm thinking along the lines of those individuals who really, truly choose to have themselves represent or sell themselves as an actual brand. You can even go as far as say Martha Stewart or Oprah sells herself as a brand. So entrepreneurs who are their brand, how can they go about separating, if necessary, not having that completely represent or encapsulate their identity as a person?
I'm not sure that they can. If you are your brand, like sure, sometimes you could have a different persona, Sasha Fierce.
Yeah.
And that probably is what people do. It's like almost a character of themselves because it is like a crafted brand. It's not necessarily the raw, authentic version of them. It's the version of them that they want you to see. So there is still a separation. Like your personal brand is what you allow others to see. It's what you allow others in about. So I think there is always a separation.
What about our podcast? Is that an extension of our brands? Are we creating brands for ourselves?
I feel like this fits well. Like we have the brand Entrepreneurs in Progress, and then we have like our personal brands, Lauren and Bridget. And so even this, like we edit, we share what we want to share with you, and we try to, include the bad and the good, and try and keep it as real as possible. But there is still a little bit of separation.
Yeah. And do you think that separation is intentional? Like more or less, it sounds like you do think it's intentional, but why is it intentional?
That's a good question. Maybe some of it is protecting yourself. When I think of like influencers in particular, it's like they're trying to sell something that appeals to people, and that might not necessarily be their full authentic self. It could be most of it, like 90%, or I don't know. But like if you're a brand, you still have an audience that you are trying to appeal to. And I guess that's why it's still a little like separated.
Yeah, I've read about like people who have had epiphanies or realizations through the work that they do, even as an entrepreneur. For example, blog writers who basically made money off of blogging about celebrities in a negative way, like only talking about the bad stuff, becoming like this cyber bully. You know, waking up one day and saying, this is not the person who I am. This is not who I want to be associated with or what I want to be associated with anymore. Yeah. I'm going to pull down the blog, rebrand myself, start over, because I think they get lost in that character that you mentioned. They get lost in what people expect them to be. And I think for me as an entrepreneur, this might sound bad. I'm not trying to downplay myself or anything like that, but sometimes I think people view me in a way that I just do not view myself, like giving me way more credit than I feel like I deserve from time to time. And that's because I view myself as someone who's constantly learning. I want to always be in that space, and I just try not to fall into that leaving my hype stuff. Like I want to be as humble as possible. I'm working on finding balance with acknowledging some of my work and what I've contributed and what I've done. But when they see like what we've talked about, sometimes the vanity metrics or some of these success stories, I think people might view me in a way that's more than what I actually am. And that comes with a lot of pressure. It comes with some pressure to perform. It comes with some pressure to prove them to be right. And it makes it feel harder to make a mistake. Like,
interesting.
And so, yeah. I think sometimes people, unfortunately, whether you want them to or not, they can create an identity for you. And if you hear it over and over again, you fall into the trappings of that.
I cannot quite relate to that, actually. I think like Brian even more so than me, because I'm not going to pretend like I don't care about what people think, because I definitely do, but I haven't felt it around my identity as much, I guess. I've always done whatever I wanted, even if it was something new. And in some cases, I've tried to actively change my reputation or identity around some beliefs that people have held about me. But sometimes you just can't. Like, I think one of the ones that I've had to let go of is growing up, I could be a little like goofy, and I guess I don't want to like call myself airheaded, but like I got some of those you know,
my gosh,
like dumb blonde jokes, but like, you know, like you're the silly one, Daniel's the smart one, and I played into that. But I guess I understand what you mean by losing yourself in that, because for a long time I didn't view myself as smart or intelligent because I felt maybe oh shit, it did happen. Wow. There it is. So yeah, I think that's an example where I guess how others perceive me, but I don't know, it's mixed, because I feel like at the same time people like wouldn't describe me as dumb. I don't know. It's just one of those.
Yeah, that's surprising, but I've gotten that too, because there's a part of me that's green, right? I'm naive because I don't have some of the experiences that others have had. So I've gotten the blonde jokes before, the black Barbie jokes before, and I'm just like airhead, or oh, she doesn't get it, or and I played in that too, because it was almost like an inside joke for me. Okay, they think I'm whatever, so I'm going to play into it, and in my mind, I'm thinking the joke's on them. Yeah. Right. They don't know that I'm in on it at this point. But then all I'm doing is pushing this narrative that they actually believe. And it's crazy. A lot of people would have considered me or consider me smart. They don't think I'm dumb per se, but they also think like I'm green in the sense of, oh, I don't know the streets, or I don't know whatever. And they just think, you know, that was frustrating. But yeah, I do think that I don't care as much anymore about what others think of me. I used to care a lot, but as you get older, you have very few fucks to give. And I am just in that space at this moment, and I like it a lot. But yes, if you're not careful, the comments seep in, the affirmations, and if that messaging is consistent, you have these outsiders controlling your narrative, or how what you think about yourself, and you play up to that, or you act to it. And that's, I think, when people lose themselves. We've talked about like how we've been trying to figure out our brand for Entrepreneurs in Progress, and how we want to identify. And it's just, we have these clear examples of who we are not. And I feel like sometimes a lot of newer entrepreneurs fall into this space of trying to talk all this business shit, or trying to appear as though they know everything, and they don't, and they're just trying to figure it out, but they're faking it till they are making it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs suffer from imposter syndrome. Me and Marcus joke about it all the time. Yeah, we have a business that's grossed over $1 million in revenue, but it certainly does not feel like it. And we feel like, how the hell did we pull this off? We're constantly questioning ourselves. But with that said, I do feel like, in terms of avoiding getting sucked into losing yourself or losing your identity, I think it is safe to try to separate yourself from the business. It's harder for others who are these influencers, people who have brands where they choose to use themselves or utilize themselves as extensions of the brands, because you could have a home care line, or you could have a product line. We know people love getting to who runs the company. People love learning the backstory of the business owner. And if they take a liking to you, they're like, oh, I want to see more of Lauren. I want to see Brian. I want to see Indy. You know,
everybody wants to see Indy.
But he's so cute.
No one cares about me or Brian. It's Indy.
But they're like, I want to see Lauren's confections. I want to see the road. You know, people really get attached to people, which is flattering, but it's hard because I think that entrepreneurs can fall into this space where they're doing this performative act rather than just running and being in business. And I see that a lot, like on LinkedIn and stuff like that. I know you're trying to push content. I know you're trying to like get people to dial in. It's hard.
I think it's a tough balance too, because in order to be successful, you have to promote your business in some capacity. And usually you have a, bigger personal network. So I understand trying to build like a personal brand a bit in an effort to help your business succeed. Like Brian doesn't do it that much, really.
Yeah.
I think he's really good at just focusing on building the business, and I don't think he has enough time or desire to like build up a personal brand. But I think that's also personality types too. I think there are entrepreneurs out there who are just heads down working on building their business. They don't care about personal brand and all that other stuff. And then there are people who are on the other spectrum who care all about personal brand. And I think that for me, I'm somewhere in the middle where I like to have a bit of both, just because I like being more open and sharing my experiences with people.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So far, you haven't felt lost as an entrepreneur, right? Like you haven't felt defined by being an entrepreneur.
No, because I still don't feel like many people view me as an entrepreneur. Like, again, I'm still very new. At least I consider myself very new. And I think I need more experience under my belt before people view me as, oh, okay, that's part of your identity. But yeah, I haven't lost myself in it.
I hear you. I think when you're newer on the journey, it's hard. And I also think when you're newer on the journey, depending on the personality type, you might feel the need to quickly develop a character of yourself to feel like you fit into being an entrepreneur with everyone else. I don't feel like I've lost myself in entrepreneurship or my identity, but I will say that being in business with my husband, sometimes there is identity loss in terms of our individuality. People think Marcus and I are a package deal. And technically we are because we were married, but we work really hard on trying to draw the distinction that we are two individual people, right? Like we don't move in tandem all the time. We're not Siamese twins. We have autonomy and we operate very independently. And I can respect and appreciate people enjoying seeing us together or what we are building or working towards. But I definitely can see couples, especially couples who work so closely together, losing an identity and just becoming like this amorphous, like one kind of entity. And I don't know, I think people can also encounter that with their own personal brand or company. So really, I wanted to have this discussion about identity as an entrepreneur, because I think that a lot of entrepreneurs starting out feel like they don't feel validated enough to be an entrepreneur or call themselves an entrepreneur. So they work really hard at attaining that validation and they get sucked in. And I think that whenever possible, it's best to try to separate yourself from your business whenever you can, not just to preserve who you are at the core, but also your mental health, right? Sometimes when those lines get to blurring, it's hard to make decisions. It's hard to determine what's best for you without always thinking about the business. I also want to say that as an entrepreneur, when we think about our identity and telling people what we do or who we are, that success does not make you and failure does not define you. I think the biggest part of being an entrepreneur is that we are trying to create a journey that will allow us to pursue our happiness and our goals. And then we don't want anyone to define us and what that looks like and what we do. It's like you said, I think entrepreneur, the title itself is very weighted, but it's also subjective and it's what we decide to make it ultimately.
Yeah, I agree with all of it.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening and tuning in. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Connect with Lauren and me on LinkedIn. Like, subscribe, share all the things. And until next time.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Lauren.